A sewing machine mat can prove very useful for a couple of reasons. First of all, it can help to stop vibration from your sewing machine, noise from your sewing machine, and secondly, it can help to protect your table from scratching as well. I've been using for years such a tatty little piece of foam for that effect on my sewing machine, so I thought it was about time I made myself a new one. And I've used a technique here which is reverse applique, which is a lovely technique, not just for sewing machine mats, but if you're making bags and on cushion covers, I think it looks amazing. So we need to cut out a template, we need to get our fabric, and we need to get sewing. I've cut out two pieces of fabric, so that's the top and the bottom of my mat, and they measure 11 inches by 18 inches. I can trim that down to size later if I need to. And then I've also made a little heart template which measures about 4 inches in both directions, and I've just cut that out of card. What I've also cut is 6 pieces of fabric, all in the greys but in different prints because I thought they'd look nice for the applique, and I've got 6 pieces of grey scrap fabric. I'll show you how I'm going to use that in just a second. What I'm also going to do is to put some wadding or batting in between the 2 pieces and then bias binding all around the edge. So just to make sure, or the easiest way I find to mark out where these hearts are going to go is to crease that in half, and then I'll need 3 on the top and 3 on the bottom. So I'll just divide that into thirds. If you wanted to measure and mark that really accurately, then of course you can do, but that'll do. Then I'm going to draw one of the hearts in each one of the boxes. Now you can keep them all nice and straight and uniform. You could have them at different quirky angles if you wish, and I think I might do that. You could even make them different sizes if you wish as well. So let's just draw around the heart. I'm not going to cut these out as yet, and I'll show you why in just a second. Not too close to the edge because you're going to have a seam allowance around here where the bias tape's going to go, so we don't want to draw over the top of that. Obviously the crease marks where these boxes are will disappear, so if I wanted to overlap those, then I could put one over here or wherever I like. Let's have one a little bit like that. And then just 2 more at the end, and we're done. It doesn't have to be hearts, you could make this in circles or squares or any shape you like. I like hearts though, I use hearts a lot. Now I'm going to put one of my grey pieces of fabric behind each one of those boxes and do these individually. I'll have a couple of pins just to hold that in place. Then I'm going to sew around the shape of the heart. So use a small stitch on your sewing machine. So I've got a 2mm on this stitch, and start to sew. Whoops. With your foot pedal, mine's just escaped. Come here. There we go, right, okay. So take it nice and easy around the curves. Just following the line around. If you need to stop, stop with the needle down and just manoeuvre that so that you're following the line that you've drawn. And then when you come down to the point, instead of pivoting right on that point, you'll find your point's actually pointier if you do 2 stitches across and then go back around the curve again. Right down the straight side, and I'm going to do 1 stitch across on the point there and then back down to where I came from. So we'll take the pins out. And cut. Now I would normally do all of the hearts all together like this before I start to cut, but I'll show you the idea and then we'll get I'll get sewing the rest of them. So now I'm going to cut around the inside of the heart around about 1/8 of an inch from the seam, and then I don't have to cut into the curves, into that seam allowance. Across here. Round we go. Right into that point, back up again. Then you'll need your iron on, so I've just warmed mine up. And we're going to take the fabric, or the scrap fabric, through the heart shape. So it may seem like, I don't know, may seem like it's not going to work very well, but don't worry, it will. Just take your time with this bit. So iron the seam flat first of all, just to make it a little bit easier. Trying to keep the iron away from the hearts that I've drawn on the other side because I'm using a heat erasable pen. There we go, then we'll post this through. So try and keep that seam right on the top. And press as you go. That's sitting really nicely now. Around this side. So that point's nice and pointy. Around the curve. Just took it all out of the way. And then let's push out that little point. Gently with the scissors, because I don't want to go through. There. If you're using a cotton that's a little bit flimsy, give it a spray with some spray starch, and that'll make your seams nice and crisp. There we go. So again, it's quite time consuming just to get that perfect shape, but that is worth the effort because now I've got the perfect shaped little heart. So I'll need to do that with each one of those 6 hearts that I've drawn on the back of my fabric. And then this is how the reverse applique works. So when I put my fabric behind there, it's reverse applique because it sits at the back instead of the heart sitting on the top. So I'll carry on doing the rest of these, then we'll come back and add the fabric. So those are all of my little heart-shaped windows. As you can see, I've started putting some of the applique behind them. What I have started to do also is to just trim away some of the excess fabric from around the hearts, not too close to the stitches, but just so that I don't find one piece of fabric poking through another one of those apertures. Doesn't really matter how neat you are, this is all going to be on the back and no one's going to see it. Okay, so that's how we are. So I've already got a stripe on that side, so I'll put the opposite stripe up here. So I think on that heart we'll have the little grey hearts. Now you will find one of these useful. It's a tacking pen, glue pen. There's lots of different makes. This one happens to be a Prim. because what you can do now is to hold this fabric down to start with. If you're going to use any kind of adhesive with fabrics and sewing machines, do make sure that it's an adhesive that's been made to go with fabric. Because if you start using paper glues on fabric and then put that through your sewing machine, it might not do it very much good. Just trimming away this fabric again. Just so I'm not sewing through too much and it doesn't poke out. Careful not to cut through the outside fabric. I'll be sewing a few buttons on to cover the mistakes. So now I'm going to put a layer of this glue all the way around the edge of the heart. It does dry quite quickly, so you need to be quite quick with this. If you don't have any glue, don't worry, you can pin, but this just makes it easier to keep everything flat as you're sewing. And remember to put the lids on, they dry out really quickly. Then your fabric goes over the back. See how much easier that is than pinning. So just make sure everything's kept nice and flat. Now then, if you've got decorative stitches on your sewing machine, you could do quite a showcase with them. I'm just going to use a pin stitch, or a little blanket stitch would look nice. Have a practice on a spare piece of fabric first of all, if you haven't done this very often. Just make sure that you know exactly where the stitch is going to sit, because I want the straight part of my stitch to be right on the edge of the seam here. And again, take your time when you go around the curves, it's worth it. Now you could hand sew if you like. You could hand sew a blanket stitch or a running stitch, a straight stitch. That might look quite nice. Or if you don't have decorative stitches on your sewing machine, you could try a zigzag stitch or just sew with a straight stitch. And I'm using a grey thread because I didn't want the stitches to stand out too much. I like this stitch because it's got lots of texture. But if you really wanted the stitches to stand out, maybe if you're using grey fabric like I am here, a bright red or a bright yellow would really stand out. Now when you stop with your needle down so that you can carry on your stitch line without going wobbly. And as you can see, I'm taking it really slowly around the curves. So I'll carry on with this one. It's looking really nice already. Finish off the other 4 hearts, and then we'll start putting the whole mat together. So that's all finished on the front side. I've given that another quick press. That's what it looks like on the back side. So I've trimmed away all of the fabric around the stitching. Then I've got some nice thick polyester wadding or batting. I don't normally like this stuff, but for underneath the sewing machine it's absolutely perfect because it's going to be very well cushioned. If you don't have any, don't worry, that is rather thick. You could use just a batting, wadding, foam stabilizer, fusible fleece. There's lots of different names for it, but as long as it's got a bit of padding behind it, a little bit of cushioning, that's fine. This is a temporary fabric adhesive, which is going to hold those 2 pieces together while I sew them. So I'm going to trim this back a little bit and then put the backing fabric on, and then I'm going to take it over to my cutting mat and just make sure that the fabric is square, and I can trim it down slightly if it's not at that point. And then because my padding is so thick, I'm going to put a tacking or basting stitch all the way around the edge on my sewing machine. So within the seam allowance, so that'll be around about 1/8 of an inch from the edge, just to hold all of those layers together before I put the bias binding on. So this is the back. And again, this is a Crafter's Companion stick and spray. 505 is a very similar product. And to be honest, don't rush out and buy anything like that, especially if you don't use it already. You could hold it together with pins. Right. Oh, that is sumptuous. Okay, so I'll trim that to size and then sew around the edge, then we'll get to applying the bias binding. So all trimmed down so that it's square, and then I've just put that tacking or basting stitch all the way around the edge. At this point, if you wanted to quilt through the layers, that might be quite nice, even if it's just in boxes that go around the hearts. I'm not going to with this one because I kind of like it like it is. So let's put the bias binding on. I like to start at the bottom in the centre. So take your bias binding and fold the end over. And then this is going to be sewn all the way around the edge. We're going to sew along that crease line there. And this is just shop bought bias binding. You could make your own if you wish. I just happened to find some that matched. There. Now then, because I've got so many layers of fabric here as well, what I've also done is to put my even feed foot on. I've actually got an attachment at the back of my machine, but if you've got a walking foot, that might help just to stop the layers of fabric from moving as you're sewing them. Okay, so down the crease, and I'm going to miter the corner. If you need to trim some of this fluff away afterwards, then that's absolutely fine. So as I come down to the end here, I need to stop. If that's half an inch there, or a centimetre, I need to stop sewing a centimetre before the end so that I can make a nice miter, which will be about there. And I'm going to lock those stitches off and take my work out. Now you could, if you wanted to, there we go, measure and mark that with a pen. And then when you get to the corner, you're going to twist this around so that the edges still meet, and you get a nice sharp corner here. And there'll be a triangle of fabric here. Okay, then we're going to carry on sewing all the way down that crease line. So I'm just going to take this out to show you what I was doing there. So where that corner is, when you turn this over, you'll have that lovely, neat, mitered corner. I'm going to hand sew this from the back just because I like doing that and I think it gives a nice, neat finish. So when I come to the back section, the bias binding folds over the stitch line that you've just made. I'll show you that later on. But when you come to the corner, it almost wants to jump into that lovely, mitered shape again. I find that so satisfying. I love doing that. I think it looks really neat. Okay, so I'm going to carry on sewing around here. Pin if you wish. I tend not to, because this is quite easy sewing one straight edge to another. I can just line those up. And this is cut on the bias, remember, so it will have a little bit of stretch to it. So try not to pull it, because we don't need the stretch on a piece like this. So again, coming up to the end here, I need to stop so that that's a box shape there. So about a centimetre or half an inch from the end. Go backwards a few stitches if you don't have a lock stitch on your sewing machine. Take your work out. Fold the edge around. Nice little triangle in the corner there. And then carry on sewing. Oops, thread's just come undone. Now when I come down to the opposite end of the bias tape to where I started, I'll just overlap very slightly. So I'll carry on sewing when I've threaded my needle, and we'll come back when I'm just about to finish. So I'm just coming up to where the two pieces overlap, and now I'm going to cut the bias tape off so I know I've got exactly the right measurement. And I need to overlap that by around about half an inch. And when you're still sewing around the seam, I want to make sure that my stitch line meets up, so that's going to make a really neat finish. Perfect. Now then, to sew the back, you can machine sew this if you prefer. I like to hand stitch because I like not to see the stitches, and I find it looks so much neater on the right side. So we're going to fold over the bias binding, and again you can trim some of this down if you find that some of the waddings kind of move like it tends to. Doesn't matter if you trim that. I like to start my knot inside the seam allowance so you don't see the end, fold the binding over, and then just catch a very small amount, just a couple of threads underneath the fold of the bias tape. Bring your needle down directly underneath and through your work, but not all the way through so that we see it on the right side, and then come up again around about 1/4 of an inch or 1/8 of an inch across. So back through the fold again. And literally just carry on sewing all the way around. So directly underneath and up about 1/4 of an inch away, underneath and up. And remember, I'm just catching the bottom fabric and a little bit of the wadding. I'm not going all the way through to the right side of the fabric because I don't want to see these stitches on the right side. So there we go, we're all finished, and that means that now that tatty thing can be thrown away and my sewing machines get a lovely new mat.